The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Love news but find keeping up a bit overwhelming? Well, Newsable is the answer. It's your daily fix of everything worth talking about. I'm your host, Imogen Wells, and in about 15 minutes, I'll bring you what you need to know from Aotearoa and around the world and explain why it matters. Newsable tackles the big stuff without taking itself too seriously. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by SparkLab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about SparkLab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is made by the Spinoff with help from Callaghan Innovation, New Zealand's innovation agency. Here's your host, Simon Pound.
A few short years ago, a New Zealand professional footballer had a dream for a shoe made out of wool, and lots of listeners will have followed every step along the way. For many, that first moment might have been seeing a former All White fronting a Kickstarter project with a great overview video for a new merino wool shoe that you could wear without socks. From there, this AllBirds idea has grown and grown through the first signs that this little idea from New Zealand was getting worldwide notice, through to investment, great media notice, huge sales, and AllBirds stores opening up in the world's great retail areas. And now, a store in Auckland. Although success can make things seem like it was a sure bet, it was, in the words of the founder and today's guest, a bad idea for a long time before it was a good one. To find out how bad ideas can turn into something quite wonderful, to chat the journey to here, and to hear what's next, AllBirds founder Tim Brown joins us now. Hey, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much for that kind welcome.
Hey, how exciting to have you here. Tell me first about how that idea began for you on the pitches while you were a professional footballer.
Yeah, well, not so much on the pitch, maybe off the pitch. I was back in Wellington playing for the Phoenix at the time, living a dream of getting paid for kicking a ball around. And one of the great things about that lifestyle was getting lots of free gear from one of the major sportswear companies that shall not be named. And saw an opportunity or a problem in my life around really simply designed shoes, and so set out to try and solve that.
And your first push at that was a different shoe company altogether, wasn't it? Called To Be.
Yeah, it was a design insight initially, and so I found a footwear factory online, visited in my off season, and started making shoes, really really simple sneakers that I sold to my teammates, who and a few other people, but not many. It was very very tiny. It was a curiosity project at the time.
Yeah, I remember seeing that pop up, the lovely white shoes with the little blue kind of inset details.
Yeah, it was the first foray into working out how to do it, and I realised along the way that the footwear industry was a huge one, and was very old fashioned in the way that it makes things, and tends to default to making them out of pretty cheap stuff, and that was where the idea that wool might be a possibility for a material in shoes, as silly as an idea as maybe that sounds. Just sort of happened.
And what were your steps to go from thinking wool's pretty abundant and it has good qualities for socks, like maybe it's a good quality for a shoe, or was it from like a hiking thing, or what led you there to wool?
I remember reading, I want to say it was like North and South or like a Metro article one day, and it was talking about the decline of the wool industry and how it was lacking in innovation, and it talked about some research grants that were going on, trying to imagine new uses for wool, and we threw, with the help of a friend at the time, threw a hat in the ring with an application grant to sort of make a material that could be used in footwear, and much to our surprise, it was successful, and this thing just dragged on though. It went on for years, kind of to the point where you've sort of forgotten about it, and I was playing football and there was a lot going on, and we were kind of trying really hard at that particular time to go to the World Cup. So, it was just kind of one of those things you just kept chipping away at with the benefit in hindsight of a lot of time and not that much pressure to actually get it right.
And from there, you must have got the material going to a degree that you decided to put together the Kickstarter. Tell me about that.
So after the World Cup, I realised that my football career was not going to get any better, and retired. Had my last professional game with the Phoenix in about March of 2012. A loss away to the Perth Glory that I barely think about anymore.
You don't hold on to being undefeated at the World Cup. Like, don't hold on to that.
Totally.
Hold on to the loss.
No, and I didn't play particularly well, and I barely think about that game. And then, but went off to go to London, back to where I was born, actually, where my father and had grown up, and where I was always wanted to go to do business school and study all the subjects I kind of avoided thus far in my life. And I had a little bit of shoemaking knowledge, which you've mentioned, from that brand that I had a crack at starting, and this woolen material that had been created. And I actually ran it through an entrepreneurship class, where I kind of was forced to sort of imagine this as a little bit more of a business proposition.
And that Kickstarter, that was quite early on in the scheme of things of getting people to pay for your idea before you get started. Was that a marketing idea to get a whole bunch of people behind you, or did you need the cash?
No, it was. So this is 2014. I'd come back for Christmas, and my brother, who had been a driving force and just sort of have a go at this, and had encouraged me to sort of shoot a video on a family friend's sheep farm in Paharanui. It cost like $1,000, and there'd been a professor coming out of that entrepreneurship class that had called me into his office, and his name's Carter Cast, and he was CEO of Walmart.com. Had this very successful business career, and he sort of said, I don't think this is a good idea. I think shoes are too hard to make. Wool shoes probably not going to work. Throw it out on Kickstarter or something, so it can fail and you can work out what you want to do with your life. And so this video was a sort of an outlet for seeing if I could fail, and it ended up kind of catching on. And in 4 days, when I came back to London, it went live in March of 2014. And in 4 days, we had enough material for 1,000 pairs of shoes. And I think we had 6 sample pairs of shoes that we'd made in a factory in Portugal at this time. And they sold out in 4 days. And we had to shut the thing down. And it was like, oh my gosh, here we go. We're off.
And from that start, I mean, I imagine there's teething problems and all kinds of things when you go from a couple of samples to having to fulfill that kind of a demand. But it looks from the outside like you scaled up really fast. So from quite a modest attempt on Kickstarter, and then a few years later, through the partnership with Joey Zwillinger, getting up to kind of big investment and bigger scale really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't feel like that at the time living through it. I had a kind of a year in London trying to deliver on the Kickstarter campaign and ship those 1,000 pairs around the world, and made sort of every mistake on the book, although we ultimately got it across the line, and then kind of just really was over it. And Joey had been, a sort of a friend, the husband of my wife's roommate at university, actually, and we'd known each other through on the wedding circuit and different things. And I rang him up for some advice one day, and ultimately ended up kind of on a whim jumping on a plane to San Francisco, where he was based, to sort of deeply immerse ourselves in the idea of the business and what it might look like to work together. And it kind of happened really, really quickly. And in Joey, we sort of found the purpose of the whole business. So there was a design insight, and there was a comfort insight with wool, and then there was this idea of a purpose around sustainability, and it came from his background and his experience. And it was sort of the moment I sort of feel like where AllBirds was born, and we raised a couple of $1 million and launched the business on the 1st of March 2016.
How did you get that enormous producer of wool products to make you this footwear product? Because it's a real innovation in the space, isn't it? Because one of the reasons no one had done wool sneakers before is because you kind of couldn't.
Well, there's a bunch of parts to it. So there's the material innovation itself, which was, again, another sort of serendipitous thing, and ultimately resulted in an introduction to this incredible mill in Italy that was 150 years old and owned a bunch of New Zealand farms, and we worked closely with them to sort of innovate and develop this material, the second generation of it, passed outside of the initial grant. And then the second bit was, finding a world-class factory, and we ultimately landed on that in Busan, South Korea. Traditionally, footwear has sort of chased the lowest dollar because of how labour-intensive it is. So Korea was going back upstream to higher quality, a higher dollar amount, but a larger mind share of a smaller factory, rather than going to the very big ones in China or in other parts of the world, and also leveraging the free trade agreement that existed certainly at the time that I walked into this room. That may not be there anymore, between Korea and the States and New Zealand and Korea, and those are the two markets that we launched. So we kind of mitigate some of the extra cost, and it was a really, really smart decision because it allowed us to sort of make really great products out of the gate.
And getting those products out there, like I know you had some really great success in your previous career as a professional sportsman, playing for the All Whites, undefeated at the World Cup and stuff. But was it still a real buzz to find out like Leonardo DiCaprio wanted to invest, or when you see some of the people wearing the shoes who've worn the shoes?
Yeah, I mean the journey has just been, have had so many sort of pinch me moments, and going down to LA and spending some time with Leo, if I could call him that. You forget that guy was sort of speaking about the environment and concerns about the way we made stuff back in the early 90s, long before it was the topical issue that it is now. And he'd found the product, and he was super curious, and he wanted to know all about it. And you're sort of sitting there going, "This is you're a long way from home." But it's been cool. There's been lots of those moments.
How did you first get the shoes onto the kind of people that it's now famous for being on? So let's say like the founder of Google.
Oh yeah, Barack Obama. It's honestly been the most random stories where they've found the product, or we've gifted it to someone that we've randomly met who's given it to them, and they've fallen in love with it. All of that is organic. None of it's been planned, and except that we've given product to certain people in a lot of different moments, and it's just been crazy. And you couldn't have written that script. You couldn't have planned for it. And I think it's just been this sort of incredible journey over the last sort of 3.5 years to sort of where we are now.
The Time magazine accolade calling them the most comfortable shoes in the world, which has had great goodness made out of it in all of the marketing and stories since. How did that come about?
So a big part of the plan with launching the business was to tell our story in through PR, and I flew to New York, and it must have been 25 what they kind of call desk sides, where you go around meeting with anyone who will really meet with you to tell the story, with the hope that they might get excited about what you're doing and write about it. And it sounds like it's easy, but it's really hard. And I think it was probably the 25th or 26th of one of those, and Time magazine with a guy that literally was going out the door. I can still remember the name of the journalist, and told the story, and he tried the product and he liked it, and he wrote this thing that sort of became at the time this sort of like validation for what we were doing in such a cool way. And sometimes you don't know when those little moments, those little inflection points are going to come. Oftentimes not until many months or years later. But that was a moment for us, and it happened in the first week, and it was a good one.
There's something about the way that you've grown the company which I really love, in that it's about a process of refinement.
Yep.
In that, lots of people grow by maybe they have a shoe and then they make another 50 styles and they keep kind of changing. But you've had a very similar model, lots of refinements along the way, and kind of built on that instead. Tell me about that process.
Traditionally in footwear, you'll have version 1, version 2, version 3, and you'll have a seasonal range, and you'll have more than one style. You have lots of them, and they change all the time. And ours has been about one style and a kind of an application of continuous improvement, whether that be through design, updates, style, tweaking the form slightly, or whether it be more sustainable materials that we've found and we've inserted into the product. Whenever we've found it, we don't have to wait. We're not. There's no wholesalers or anyone in between the relationship with the customer, so we're able to inject that in real time, and then comfort as well. So as we've improved our knowledge of how to engineer shoes, and there's been something like 30 plus changes to the Wool Runner, our first style, since we launched it, and there's only ever been one version. So it's a different type of approach, and that just sort of relentless execution or pursuit of this form and this experience has been sort of easy to say, much harder to do, but it's quite different than traditional footwear and how the approach to it.
And even in terms of like route to market and stuff, as you know, online's always been such a big part of it. Things like 30-day money-back guarantee if you don't like them, which how many people take you up on that?
Yeah, good. Like a decent amount. And I mean, I think it's all about, hey, we believe in our product. We think it's great. If you don't like it, you know, that's completely fine. And but try it. And it's just sort of really thinking through that customer journey and all the little touch points and how can you make that simple and easy and how can you bring a sense of humour to it and think about the packaging and every aspect of how someone might buy a shoe and experience your product. And we tried to do that from the beginning, and I think the attention to those details is super important when you're building a brand.
And when you go into traditional retail, like bricks and mortar on the storefront, quite an interesting flip to be going in there with such a limited product range. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was walking around Soho, meeting Venn clients over there, and all these stores, you know, the big name stores were all empty, except for the AllBirds store there that had a line out the door.
Yeah, it's you know, retail was always a part of the strategy. Like direct to consumer, if you're familiar with that terminology, often gets conflated with just e-commerce or online, but it's actually about a direct relationship with the customer. And so the ability to build stores, we knew people loved trying on shoes. We knew that people wanted to sort of learn more about the brand. They wanted to ask questions. We knew there'd be lower return rates in store. We knew that it could also be a sort of a marketing expense and a marketing vehicle, and we're interested in sort of the interplay between online and offline business and what that might mean. And so I think it's our 10th store is just open in Britomart now, and there's a couple in China and in Covent Garden in London, and we're really excited about the potential of what that kind of format can be. And we thought a lot about it from a design point of view in terms of how that experience could be done in the right way.
And I imagine kind of along the way also proving out the model so that you can then push larger and push bigger. Tell me about how you've actually gone out and attracted from, I mean, it's just been reported, we don't have the real numbers on it, but some really big valuations on some quite small chunks of your company changing hands to then give you this platform to be able to grow so hard.
Yeah, it's interesting, particularly in San Francisco, you know, people congratulate you when you've raised money. And that's not actually the time you should be celebrating. It's like you've just taken a mortgage out on your house. You don't actually own anything there. That's when the pressure of expectation has come. Someone's backed your idea and the promise of execution, and now you've got to go do it. And fortunately, we've sort of raised money from some great people that really backed us to build something over the long term. But also, we've done it. You know, we've run the business profitably from the beginning, and we've always been able to, fortunately, sort of raise money on our terms when we've needed it, when there's been a really strong reason why we wanted to invest more in retail, or we believed that there was a customer in China that was the same that was in the States that could care about what we were doing and maybe needed our product. So there was always a reason, and I think it's been helpful, and it's allowed us, I think, to do that, you know, really selectively with really, really great people.
Tell me about the other products that you're moving into after having been so focused on shoes.
Yeah, socks. So we launched socks, and you know, we've been working on them for sort of something around 18 months, maybe a bit longer. Some would say too long. Engineering socks from the yarn up with a which you don't normally do. Normally, you just sort of kind of white label this thing and don't think too much about it and put your brand on it. We're a material kind of innovation company, I think, if anything. So we looked deeply at the materials and imagined that there was a different type of sock that might be better, and so we set out to do that, and that launched yesterday, and it's gone really well. So yeah, socks. Yeah, I know like a lot about it. It's sort of it ends up it's one of those things that's really hard to do to make really well. So,
what would be next for you?
I'm not going to tell you. I'm just not going to tell you.
We won't tell you.
No, I know. Yeah, but except to say that we're attracting sort of really world-class design talent and material experts and a bunch of sort of infrastructure that we never had. So it's exciting because we've done this always on the smell of an oily rag, and now we're actually sort of picking our head up and imagining sort of what we could make and who best to do that with a bunch of different resources that we never had before. And I think the second thing is AllBirds wasn't about footwear and it wasn't about wool. So we've acted really small and have only just a handful of styles that we sell, but we've always imagined AllBirds would be something bigger. So So that's a long non-answer to your question, except to say that I feel really excited about the stuff that's coming down the pipe.
It's been really cool, as a follower from back here watching, to see the way that you've all upskilled so much, yourselves, and also like seeing Toby Morris's cartoons on the world stage and seeing Jamie McClellan's work, and really cool to see that growth journey there. What kind of mindset changes does it take to come from, a New Zealand scale, small, selling shoes to your mates, to operating in this kind of league?
I think there's been a lot of education. I feel like going into San Francisco, you're forced to imagine the sort of success that you're told in New Zealand not to think about, to maybe suppress. And you're forced to imagine things at scale, and you're forced to back yourself. So what if this went right versus what if it went wrong? And I think that's allowed us to make sort of supply chain decisions so that if this did take off, we were the right type of people that could make lots more of our product than just a few. And so that idea of imagining success, I think, is sort of something that's definitely I've had to learn. I think you have this, and it's a little bit of a cliche, but the kind of Kiwi mentality of kind of wanting to just sort of muck in and we'll work it out, which is super healthy and so positive, versus the alternative, which is actually, I don't know how to do that. So let's go find the best person in the world to talk to get guidance and advice and really be like this sort of network learner, and to borrow my co-founder's words in terms of how we can kind of really, really soak up the best knowledge and then either choose to use it or not, but ultimately be a student of all these things we don't know. And then that sort of translated into hiring. I think Joey and I have been really, really honest and upfront about the one or two things we did really well, and then a bunch of things we didn't, and then hired way ahead of the curve with people that we could learn from, and that takes a certain amount of confidence to kind of to sort of get really, really senior people in early, and we've done that successfully.
It must take quite a team to do things that have never been done before in terms of the materials that you're bringing in through the jandals, through the tree-derived shoes and the like.
Yeah, it's really, the stuff's hard. I mean, we're trying to. We're trying to sort of, in the case of a sole material, traditionally EVA is one of the most commonly used materials in footwear. Could you make that out of natural materials, sustainable materials? And we found a way to do that with the byproduct of the production of ethanol, sugarcane, from Brazil. And but we imagined that when we had 6 people, we had to approach a big corporate company in Brazil that is notoriously slow moving. And we had our first intern at the time mock up a cover of the Wall Street Journal, imagining what this story might mean for the world if these guys did this, and sort of said, don't do it for us, do it for the entire industry, and we'll make this available. We'll make this open source and available to everyone. And they did it, and they moved super quickly. And so there's a certain amount of kind of confidence that you can go and try and make that happen. And always imagining sort of this as being really successful, I think, has helped us. And then it's also allowed us to act really, really small and sort of moving towards some of the things we want to do.
That's so cool, and has echoes of the Phil Knight Shoe Dog story about the way that they cut down the formaldehyde and then open source that technology.
Totally. And the Wall Street Journal, this poor intern, because when the illustrations on the Wall Street Journal, they have all those little dots, and it's like super hard to do. So this poor guy was and then he had to print it out and he had to make it look like a newspaper. We really went into it. But look, it ended up being the New York Times, and that story actually happened, and we managed to make that work. And now there's north of 100 companies globally using this material, and yeah, it's a different way of thinking about things. And we did that not just because it's good for the environment, we're good guys, but because the more people use it would drive the cost down. So, I think that's the really interesting sort of the idea of sort of the intersection of purpose and profit, and and a really positive and interesting conversation on the topic of sustainability.
And thinking big and small, and from watching again from the outside, things like the cool collabs that you did with Supreme Coffee and the like, and then you see it then at another level with Shake Shack.
Yeah, I mean, who are the people in the brands, and just more broadly that you can that share, that are looking at the world in the same way that you can, who you can learn from. I think that being said, like when we get asked about this a lot, I think one of the things we've been really successful about doing is saying no to 95% of the opportunities and the meetings and the things like that come across our table, because I think in some ways it's much easier to understand what you're not, and that clarity of focus, so you can kind of do one or two things really, really well, I think is very important in the early stages of a business. and there's so many sort of like temptations and distractions and opportunities. So you've got to be very, very selective with where you sort of deploy your time and what you associate your brand with.
And that focus, I imagine a lot of people said no to you along the way, that it couldn't work, that it couldn't be done, that you were bananas to try it. How do you filter out the useful stuff within experts telling you things don't work from the stuff that means that you're able to still get out there and make it happen?
Yeah, look, it's the $1 million question. If you're not listening to feedback, you're dumb. You should be soliciting advice on whatever you're doing. If you're listening to all of it, you're even dumber. And we're developing a sort of a sense for sort of who to ignore and who not to. And the number of different people that we spoke to that knew and far more than Joey and I about making shoes or about the wool industry and what could or couldn't be done were numerous. And you have to have the courage to sort of back yourself. And we launched one style of shoe, and with the lead times on the development of shoes, there wasn't going to be a second chance on that. Like, people were going to like that, or they weren't. And we sort of thought, hey, we really believe in what we're doing here. We're going to back ourselves and have the courage to have a point of view. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, you need to be okay with that. Versus sort of, let's make 27 things and to sort of spread our risk and dilute the quality of what we're doing. We had the courage of our convictions, and I'm really proud of that looking back.
What's been a hard moment and what's been a highlight?
Going back to my sporting days, sometimes you're winning games, but you're actually losing, and vice versa. Sometimes things are not going right, but you're just playing really, really well. And we've had probably our darkest moments when, from the surface, from the outside, it's looked really, really good. And Joey and I in particular had one sort of big dark moment where we just sort of hadn't really kind of got into a rhythm in terms of how we were working, and it came about 2 months after we'd launched, when we'd just been working really, really hard, and we just weren't in sync, and that was really, really hard. It was really difficult when you're not perfectly in sync with the person you're building this with. It's really tough. And then you have all these sort of like really good moments, like last night when we had the opening party for the store in Auckland that we've been planning and trying to make happen for a long time, and you see all your friends and family, and you step back and you go, this is really special, and we've kind of come full circle here, and finding a way to sort of make sure you keep pushing, because I think when you're building a business, you're sort of always worrying about stuff all the time. To step back and say, hey, yep, this is good. We're having fun here. This is good. So,
what advice do you have for people who want to make something happen in the face of a world that says, nah?
Don't do it. Don't. I don't know. I feel like that's just like such well-trodden ground. Lots of people talking about it. I feel like a couple of things. I feel like this cult of entrepreneurship is talked about a lot. And people want to believe in the myth of the overnight success, that like there's some sort of silver bullet. It's a really long, hard road. So if you're going to pick something, do something that you feel strongly about and you enjoy, and realize it's not for everyone. Just sort of be really thoughtful about going for it. That being said, the challenge of building something is so difficult that the back end is so rewarding. And the people that you meet, and if you commit to this thing, it can be really, really joyful. And I don't think there's anything better than being in a position where you can do something meaningful and do it with, and this is the best bit, do it with people you really, really like.
Ah, that's so cool. Well, thank you so much, Tim Brown, co-founder at AllBirds, for sharing your story today.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks so much. Thank you to Alice Webb-Liddell for producing. Thank you very much for having us along in your ears and listening. If you are a fan and follower of the Spinoff, make sure you check out the Spinoff Members, a program where you're able to get behind and support and choose and shape the investigative journalism that the Spinoff provides.
You've been listening to Business is Boring, presented by Simon Pound, and brought to you by the Spinoff and Callaghan Innovation.
From the Spinoff Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spinoff Podcast Network.